My name is Jordan Anderson, and I never believed in God until I died. For most of my 36 years on this earth, I was a devoted atheist. I prided myself on being a man of science, someone who didn't need spiritual crutches to navigate life's hardships. I mocked those who believed in an afterlife, calling them weak-minded and gullible. Religion was just a tool for controlling the masses, I would argue confidently at family gatherings, while my religious mother would look on with sad eyes. But everything changed on that night in Riverview Correctional Facility. I'd been serving an 8-year sentence for armed robbery, a desperate act during the lowest point of my life. 3 years into my sentence, the prison had become a familiar hell. The constant noise, the pervasive threat of violence, the stripped dignity. It all blended into a gray monotony that I navigated with practiced caution. That night in July started like any other. After dinner, I returned to my cell, nodding to my cellmate, Victor, as I climbed onto my bunk. The tension in the air was thick, but that wasn't unusual. Prison always felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. The spark came during recreation time. I was playing cards with a group of inmates I usually associated with. Not friends exactly, but allies in the complex social hierarchy of prison life. An argument erupted between Ramirez and a newer inmate named Keller, over what seemed like nothing at the time. Some perceived slight, a misinterpreted glance. "You think you can stare me down, boy," Ramirez hissed, his face inches from Keller's. I should have walked away. I'd survived 3 years by minding my own business. But something made me step between them. "Come on, guys. Not worth getting thrown in solitary over," I said, placing a hand on Ramirez's shoulder. In prison, even well-intentioned intervention can be interpreted as disrespect. Ramirez turned his fury on me. "You taking his side now, Anderson?" His eyes narrowed dangerously. "I'm not taking anyone's side," I replied, palms up in a placating gesture, "just saying it's not worth it." The punch came fast, catching me in the jaw and sending me staggering backward. Guards shouted, inmates scattered, and suddenly I was in the middle of chaos. I fought back instinctively, landing a solid hit that only enraged Ramirez further. I didn't see the shiv until it was too late. A burning sensation exploded in my abdomen. I looked down to see a crudely fashioned blade protruding from my stomach, Ramirez's hand still gripping its makeshift handle. Time seemed to slow. The guards' shouts became distant echoes. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, warm blood pooling beneath me with alarming speed. "Man down! We need medical!" I heard someone shout as darkness began to creep in from the edges of my vision. My last conscious thought was strangely calm, almost amused. So this is how it ends. Bled out on a prison floor over a card game. Then everything went black. The next thing I remember was floating. I was looking down at my own body, surrounded by frantic prison guards performing CPR. Blood, my blood, was everywhere, staining the gray concrete floor crimson. I watched with detached fascination as a medical team rushed in, placing defibrillator pads on my chest. I wasn't scared or confused. In fact, I felt more lucid and aware than I'd ever felt in my life. It was as if I'd been seeing the world through a foggy window that had suddenly been wiped clean. "I'm dead," I thought. But the thought didn't disturb me. Instead, it felt like acknowledging an obvious fact, like noting the sky is blue. "Time of death, 9:47 p.m., someone said below. As soon as those words were spoken, I felt a gentle pull upward. I passed through the ceiling of the recreation room, as if it were made of mist rather than concrete. Up through the floors above, past cells filled with oblivious inmates, through the prison roof, and into the night sky. The prison compound shrank beneath me, its harsh floodlights diminishing to pinpricks in the darkness. I felt no cold, no wind, despite rising rapidly into the night air. There was only a sense of lightness and liberation, freedom more profound than anything I'd ever experienced. I should have been questioning my sanity. The rational atheist mind I'd cultivated should have been scrambling for scientific explanations. Oxygen deprivation, dying brain hallucinations, something, anything to make sense of what was happening. Instead, I simply knew this was real. More real than anything I had experienced in life. As the earth fell away beneath me, I entered a darkness that should have been terrifying, but somehow wasn't. It was a vast, velvety void that seemed to cradle me as I moved through it. Then in the distance, I saw it. A pinprick of light that grew brighter as I approached. I'd heard about the tunnel of light from near-death stories I'd scoffed at in life. I'd dismissed them as fabrications or the last gasps of a dying brain. Yet here I was, moving toward a radiance that grew more brilliant with each passing moment. The light didn't hurt my eyes despite its intensity. It seemed to welcome me, drawing me forward with gentle insistence. As I approached, I began to hear music, not the kind played by instruments, but something more fundamental. It was as if the very fabric of reality was vibrating in perfect harmony, creating sounds more beautiful than anything earthly ears could comprehend. And there was something else, presences all around me, moving in the same direction. I couldn't see distinct forms, just impressions of others journeying alongside me. The tunnel expanded, the light enveloped me, and suddenly, I stopped. I stood in a place that defied description. There were no walls, no ceiling, no floor, yet I wasn't floating. There was light everywhere, but no sun or source I could identify. The light seemed to emanate from everything, including me. Before me stood a presence so magnificent that I instinctively fell to my knees. I couldn't make out a distinct form. It was as if looking directly at the sun, but infinitely more powerful. Yet somehow, I knew who it was. Jesus Christ. The atheist in me reeled in shock and denial. How could I recognize someone I'd never believed in? But my soul knew instantly, with a certainty beyond any earthly knowledge. His voice came not as sound, but as understanding, blooming directly in my consciousness. Jordan. Just my name, spoken with such love that it shattered me. In that single word was more compassion than I'd experienced in my entire life. It held knowledge of every moment of my existence, every thought I'd ever had, every pain I'd ever inflicted or endured. And then it began, my life, playing before me in its entirety, but from an entirely new perspective. I saw not just my actions, but their effects rippling outward, touching others in ways I'd never realized. I saw myself as a child, blessed with loving parents who tried to instill faith in me, which I rejected with increasing vehemence as I grew older. I saw myself mocking my mother's prayers, dismissing my father's gentle invitations to church. I felt their pain at my rejection, not just of their faith, but of a foundational part of who they were. I saw every time I'd ridiculed believers, taking a perverse pride in dismantling their faith with what I'd thought were clever arguments. But now I saw the damage I'd done, the seeds of doubt I'd planted in vulnerable hearts. the confusion and spiritual distress I'd caused. I relived my darkest moments through new eyes, the gradual descent into addiction that led to desperation, the robbery that sent me to prison. But this time, I felt the terror of the store clerk as I pointed a gun at his face. I felt his children's anguish when he came home shaking that night, unable to sleep for weeks afterward. There was no judgment from the presence beside me, only infinite understanding and sorrow at the pain I'd caused myself and others. But that made it worse. I wanted anger, condemnation, something to push against. This gentle sorrow was unbearable in its perfect truth. Every moment I'd wasted, every person I'd hurt, every opportunity for kindness I'd ignored, all laid bare. I had nowhere to hide, no way to rationalize or excuse. For the first time, I saw myself truly. And I was not the man I'd thought I was. Waves of shame crashed over me. How could I have been so blind, so arrogant? I'd strutted through life dispensing judgment on believers, convinced of my intellectual superiority, while remaining oblivious to the damage I was leaving in my wake. I had no idea. I managed to communicate somehow. I didn't know. The presence, Jesus, responded with understanding that flowed like warm oil, soothing my remorse without diminishing the truth of what I'd seen. Few do, while clothed in flesh. That is why judgment belongs to me alone. Then came the question, not in words, but in pure meaning. Did I wish to enter the kingdom prepared for me? I hesitated, knowing with sudden clarity that I didn't deserve such grace. How could I, who had spent a lifetime denying his very existence, now accept such an invitation? Before I could respond, Jesus communicated again, this understanding gentler, but firm. You cannot enter as you are. The corruption within you would taint what is perfect. You must first see what awaits those who reject truth until the end. Anxiety flooded me. Although not like any earthly fear I'd known, this was deeper, a soul recognition of something terrible approaching. When the weight becomes too great to bear, call upon my name and title, he instructed. Whether you return is yet to be determined. With those words, the light began to recede. The beautiful music that had surrounded me distorted, taking on discordant tones that set my very being on edge. The presence of Jesus withdrew, and I was left alone in rapidly dimming light. Then the descent began. Unlike my gentle upward journey, this descent was violent. I felt as if I were being dragged downward by an irresistible force. The darkness that replaced the light wasn't the gentle void I'd passed through earlier. This was an oppressive, suffocating blackness that seemed alive with malice. The temperature changed dramatically. The comfortable weightlessness I'd experienced gave way to a sensation of increasing heat that quickly became unbearable. If I'd had physical skin, it would have blistered. The beautiful harmony I'd heard earlier was replaced by a cacophony of sounds, wailing, screaming, gnashing, and beneath it all, a low, constant hum that vibrated with dread. The sounds weren't just heard, they were felt, penetrating whatever substance now constituted my being. I was approaching something terrible. I knew this with absolute certainty. Suddenly, I stopped falling. Before me appeared what I can only describe as a tear in reality itself, a jagged, pulsing opening that seemed to bend the darkness around it. Through this rift came wafts of a stench so foul that it would have made my physical body retch uncontrollably. I tried to retreat, to move in any direction away from this doorway, but I was being pulled inexorably toward it. As I approached, I saw what appeared to be words written in fire along the edges of the rift. in a language I'd never seen, but somehow understood. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. The literary reference wasn't lost on me. Dante's Inferno had been one of my favorite works to cite when mocking religious concepts of hell. Even educated believers don't realize they're quoting medieval fiction, not scripture. I'd smugly informed countless Christians. Now, the irony crushed me. Had Dante somehow glimpsed this reality? I was pulled through the opening, the passage feeling like being forced through a space too small, compressing my very essence painfully. Then I was through, falling again, but differently now, tumbling, spinning, with no control or orientation. I landed, if that's the right word for it, on what felt like solid ground. Around me spread a landscape that defied earthly description, yet contained horrifyingly familiar elements. I stood on barren ground, cracked and dry as a desert, yet somehow putrid and rotting simultaneously. The sky, if it could be called that, was a roiling mass of darkness, occasionally split by lightning that illuminated nothing. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of sulfur, making it difficult to see far in any direction. In the distance loomed structures that resembled buildings, but were wrong somehow. Proportions skewed, surfaces seeming to shift when not directly observed. Between me and these structures moved shadowy figures, some appearing humanoid, others defying categorization entirely. What struck me most wasn't the alienness of this realm, but its perverted familiarity, as if someone had taken reality and twisted it into a grotesque parody. Everything felt corrupted, decayed, wrong at a fundamental level. And the sounds, oh, the sounds, moans of despair echoed across the landscape, punctuated by occasional screams that raised hairs I no longer possessed. Underneath it all was a constant whispering in languages both recognizable and alien, carrying meanings I couldn't quite grasp, but that filled me with dread. I wasn't alone. I sensed presences approaching before I saw them, entities moving toward me with purpose. "Welcome, welcome," called a voice that sounded almost human, but contained undertones that scraped against my soul. A new arrival. How delightful. The figures approaching appeared human at first glance. Normal people wearing ordinary clothes. 5 of them, smiling broadly, arms outstretched in greeting. There was something comforting in seeing seemingly normal humans in this hellish place. "You must be confused," said a woman at the front of the group, her voice honeyed and sympathetic. "Don't worry. We all felt the same way when we first arrived." "Where am I?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Why, you're home now," replied a man beside her, his smile too wide for his face. "This is where you belong. With us." As they drew closer, their appearances began to shift. Subtle at first. Skin tones becoming ashen, eyes sunken, then more dramatic. Their movements became jerky, unnatural. The woman's sympathetic smile stretched until it split her face, far wider than humanly possible, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "You can't be here," one of them said, head tilting at an impossible angle. "You're not fully dead, not yet." "But we can fix that," hissed another, whose form was now barely recognizable as human, flesh seeming to melt and reform continuously. "We can make you stay," said a third, voice dropping several octaves mid-sentence. They surrounded me, reaching with hands that elongated into claws. Their bodies continued to transform, revealing their true nature, demonic entities that had been masquerading as human. Terror overwhelmed me. These weren't lost souls. They were predators, and I was prey. "Jesus Christ," I screamed, remembering the instruction I'd been given. The effect was immediate. The entities recoiled as if struck, hissing in pain and rage. They couldn't touch me directly now, but they circled, looking for an opening, occasionally darting forward to test the invisible barrier my words had created. "He doesn't belong to you," spat the one who had appeared as a woman, her form now fully revealed. A twisted, emaciated thing with leathery wings and eyes like burning coals. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "We'll see," replied another, its voice like gravel. "They all come here eventually, the ones who deny him." "He's been granted a tour," said a new voice behind me. I spun to face the newcomer and immediately wished I hadn't. This entity was smaller than the others, but emanated greater malevolence. It stood perhaps 4 feet tall, its skin a mottled gray-green that seemed to ripple with internal movement. Its face was vaguely reptilian, with yellow, slitted eyes that held ancient intelligence and boundless hatred. "I'll be your guide," it said, its breath visible as waves of heat that stank of rotting meat. "You may call me..." "Guide." It made a sound like broken glass being crushed. Laughter, I realized. The other entities backed away, clearly deferring to this newcomer. "Come," it commanded, turning without checking if I would follow. "There is much to see, and your time here is limited." I hesitated, looking around for any escape route, any alternative to following this horrifying creature deeper into what I now understood with terrible clarity was actually hell. "Unless you prefer to remain with my hungry friends," the guide asked without turning back. The circling entities edged closer, their forms becoming more monstrous by the second. "Jesus Christ," I whispered again, drawing on the protection I'd been promised. "Yes, yes," the guide said impatiently. "That works for now. But names lose power with repetition, especially when spoken without true understanding. Come." Seeing no alternative, I followed the creature, leaving behind the predatory entities that watched me go with obvious disappointment. We approached what appeared to be a cliff edge. As we neared it, I could see that it overlooked a vast open space, a pit so deep that its bottom was lost in darkness. Around this pit, arranged in concentric circles, were countless small cells or chambers carved into the rock walls. "The organization is quite efficient," the guide explained with obvious pride. "Sins of similar nature grouped together for administrative convenience. A soul's dominant transgressions determine placement." From where we stood, I could see into some of the nearer cells. Each contained a single occupant, each in their own private torment. "Why are they separated?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the collective moaning that rose from the pit. I expected, mass torture chambers or something. The guide made that broken glass laugh again. A common misconception. Hell is not primarily about physical pain, though there's plenty of that. It's about isolation, separation, from hope, from love, from others, from God. Humans are social creatures. Eternal solitude with only your own corruption for company, that's true torment. As we walked along the cliff edge, the guide pointed out particular cells, occasionally stopping to let me observe. "Look there," it commanded, indicating a cell where a well-dressed man paced in what appeared to be a luxurious office. A CEO who built his fortune exploiting workers and destroying lives. He believes he's still alive, still running his company. Every decision he makes creates catastrophe. His employees, all illusions we provide, come with endless problems he cannot solve. His business crumbles around him, hour after hour, day after endless day. He starts each cycle believing today will be different, only to watch everything fall apart again. I watched as the man screamed in frustration, sweeping papers from his desk, only to have them reappear moments later. His phone rang constantly with calls bearing news of fresh disasters. He valued control above all else in life, the guide explained. Now he has none for eternity. We moved on to another cell. This one contained a woman sitting before a mirror in what appeared to be an elegant dressing room. As I watched, her reflection aged before her eyes, beauty fading into wrinkles, skin sagging, hair falling out. She screamed, clawing at her face, which remained young and beautiful to my eyes, but continued to deteriorate in her reflection. Vanity, the guide said simply. She based her entire worth on her appearance, manipulating and destroying others to maintain her status as most beautiful. Now she watches herself decay endlessly while remaining physically perfect, unable to truly die and escape what she sees. We passed dozens more cells, each containing torment specifically designed for the individual souls. Each punishment a perverted reflection of the sin that had dominated their lives. A glutton surrounded by delicious food that turned to ash in his mouth. A gossip whose tongue grew longer with each word spoken, eventually choking her, only to reset and begin again. A man who had abused children, now eternally small and powerless among giant versions of his victims. Poetic, isn't it? The guide asked, clearly pleased with the arrangements. It's horrible, I managed to say. Oh, this is just the upper level, the guide replied, for those whose sins, while significant, weren't their entire identity. There are much worse accommodations below. As if to illustrate this point, the cliff path began to spiral downward, taking us deeper into the pit. The air grew hotter, the sounds of suffering more intense. The cells we passed now contain more extreme torments that I can't bring myself to describe in detail. I saw historical figures I recognized, experiencing punishments tailored to their earthly atrocities. Dictators, mass murderers, architects of genocide, all facing justice proportionate to their crimes. Why show me all this? I asked, my non-physical form trembling with horror. Educational purposes, the guide replied with mock sincerity. Everyone gets the tour. It helps you understand what awaits. But Jesus said whether I return is yet to be determined, I said. That implies I might not end up here. The guide stopped, turning to face me fully. Its reptilian features twisted into something like a smile, but filled with malice. Hope, it spat, the word itself seeming to cause it pain. The cruelest torment of all. Yes, technically your fate isn't sealed. He's annoyingly fond of second chances. But look around you, denier of truth. This is where atheists belong. This is where you belong. It gestured to a nearby cell. Take a special look at this one. I think you'll find it informative. I approached cautiously. Inside was a man who looked disturbingly like me. Not identical, but similar enough to be unsettling. He sat at a desk covered with scientific journals and atheist philosophical texts. As I watched, he would read passages, laugh mockingly, and launch into what appeared to be well-rehearsed arguments against God's existence. But each time he finished an argument, a voice would respond, invisible, sourceless, dismantling his logic with perfect clarity. The man would become increasingly frustrated, frantically flipping through his books for counter-arguments that inevitably failed. Eventually, he would break down weeping, acknowledging the truth, only to immediately forget this realization and begin the cycle again. A professor of philosophy who led countless students away from faith, the guide explained. Every soul he influenced is another mark against him. Every young mind he filled with doubts compounds his punishment. I felt sick. I'm not like him, I protested weakly. I didn't lead others away from. But even as I spoke, my life review from earlier replayed in my mind. All the times I'd mocked believers, all the seeds of doubt I'd planted. How many had I influenced without realizing it? Ah, recognition dawns, the guide observed with satisfaction. This could be your eternity, Jordan Anderson, perpetually realizing too late the truth you spent a lifetime denying. The weight of this possibility crushed me. The horror of what I'd seen, the realization of my own arrogance, the terrible truth that I deserved punishment. It all became too much to bear. Jesus Christ, I cried out, no longer caring about the guide's warning that the name would lose power. It was all I had left to cling to. The reptilian creature hissed in annoyance as the protective barrier around me strengthened again, but it didn't retreat. Very well, it said, but your tour isn't complete. There's one more thing you need to see. With a gesture of its clawed hand, the rock face beside us rippled like water. An opening appeared, revealing what looked like an ordinary hallway with bright, clinical lighting. After you, the guide said, motioning me forward. Against my better judgment, I entered. The guide followed, and the opening sealed behind us. The hallway was jarringly normal after the horrors I'd witnessed. White walls, linoleum floor, fluorescent lighting. It could have been any hospital corridor on Earth. What is this place? I asked, voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. A different perspective, the guide replied, cryptically. We walked in silence until reaching a set of double doors marked Emergency Department. Passing through them brought us into a chaotic scene, doctors and nurses rushing around a trauma bay where a bloodied figure lay on a table. With a shock, I recognized myself, pale, unmoving, a medical team performing desperate measures to revive me. Present time, the guide informed me. 20 minutes since your departure. They've been working hard to bring you back. I watched, detached, as a doctor called for the defibrillator again. My body jerked with the shock, but remained lifeless on the table. Such effort for a worthless soul, the guide commented. Why bother? A nurse wiped sweat from her brow, determination etched on her face. Come on, she urged my lifeless form. You can make it. Something about her compassion for a stranger, a criminal no less, touched me deeply. Again, the doctor ordered, and once more my body convulsed under the electrical current. They won't succeed, the guide said with certainty. Your body is too damaged. Your soul is already claimed. This is merely the formality of failure. Yet the medical team continued their efforts, refusing to give up. I turned to the guide. Why show me this? To demonstrate the futility of hope, it replied. To show you that your earthly existence is already over. There is no going back. But as it spoke, I noticed something the guide seemed unaware of, a presence in the room that didn't belong. In the corner, observing silently, stood a figure of light so subtle I almost missed it among the bright hospital lights. An angel. It made no move to interfere with the medical team, but stood watchful and waiting. When it noticed my awareness, it gave an almost imperceptible nod. The guide, following my gaze, hissed in anger. Meddling messengers, it spat, always interfering. For the first time, I felt something other than dread, a tiny spark of hope. The angel's presence suggested this wasn't as decided as the guide wanted me to believe. "Take me back," I demanded suddenly. "Back?" The guide laughed. "Back to what? Your tour isn't complete. There are lower levels to—" "Jesus Christ, Son of God," I interrupted, instinctively adding the title as instructed earlier. The effect was explosive. The guide shrieked, its form rippling as if under attack. The hospital scene around us began to dissolve, reality fracturing like broken glass. "This changes nothing," the guide screamed as it retreated. "You've seen where you belong. You know the truth now." Light began to break through the dissolving scene, growing brighter until it was all I could perceive. The guide's final words echoed as it faded. "We'll be waiting for your return, Atheist." Then there was only light. The transition was jarring. One moment surrounded by dissolving reality, the next suspended in pure, peaceful light. Gone was the oppressive heat of hell, replaced by gentle warmth that permeated my being. The cacophony of suffering souls gave way to that beautiful music I'd heard earlier, the harmony of creation itself. I was rising again, but unlike the violent descent, this ascent felt natural and right, like returning home after a long absence. You called upon me with understanding. Came that voice that wasn't a voice, the understanding blooming directly in my mind. Jesus was with me again, his presence unmistakable, though I still couldn't perceive a distinct form. Just radiance too brilliant to comprehend. "What you witnessed was real," he continued. "Not a metaphor or a vision, but a place prepared for those who ultimately reject truth." Am I going back there?" I asked, the experience still fresh and terrifying in my memory. "That depends on you, Jordan." We continued to ascend, moving towards something I could sense rather than see. A destination of incomprehensible beauty. "You have seen both your life's truth and the consequence of final rejection," Jesus communicated. "Now you must make your choice with full knowledge." "Choice? What choice? I don't want to go to hell." The words came out more desperately than I intended. "Fear of punishment is not the same as love of truth," came the gentle response. "Many desire merely to escape consequences rather than embrace transformation." I understood then. It wasn't simply about avoiding hell. It was about accepting a fundamental reorientation of my entire being. I was wrong, I admitted, the words feeling insufficient yet necessary. About everything. About you. I didn't just disbelieve. I mocked and led others away from you. How can I possibly make that right? "You cannot," was the simple reply. "No human can undo the harm they cause. That is why I came, to do what humans cannot do for themselves." Our ascent slowed as we approached what appeared to be a boundary of some kind, a transition between realms. Through it, I glimpsed splendor beyond description. The kingdom of heaven I somehow knew, but I also sensed I wasn't ready to enter. Not yet. "You understand correctly," Jesus confirmed. "That place is being prepared for you, but it is not yet your time to remain." "I'm going back," I realized, feeling both disappointment and relief, back to my body. "If you choose to. There is purpose in your return, testimony to bear, a life to live differently. But the choice must be yours, made freely." "What about all the damage I've done? The people I've hurt, the souls I've turned away from you?" "Restoration is possible where there is life," came the response. Not all consequences can be undone, but new paths can be created. Seeds of truth can replace seeds of doubt. I thought of my parents. Their patient faith I dismissed so arrogantly. I thought of everyone I'd influenced with my atheist arguments. Could I possibly counteract that damage? Your testimony will be powerful precisely because of who you were, Jesus communicated, answering my unspoken doubts. But the journey will not be easy. Your former allies will become opponents. Many will reject your experience as hallucination or delusion. I don't care, I decided with sudden clarity. I know what I've seen, what I've experienced. I need to go back and tell others. Then it is time. We approached what I now recognized as my body, still lying on the hospital trauma table. The medical team continued their resuscitation efforts, though their movements suggested they were close to giving up. I hovered above my body. I felt a gentle push downward. There was a moment of resistance, like trying to put on damp clothing, as my soul reconnected with my physical form. Then pain, excruciating, all-encompassing physical pain as nerve endings reactivated and damage registered. My eyes flew open. I gasped desperately for air, my lungs burning as they reinflated. "He's back," someone shouted. "We've got a pulse." The hospital room spun around me, faces blurring as consciousness flickered unstably. "Mr. Anderson, can you hear me?" a doctor asked, leaning close, shining a light in my eyes. I tried to speak, but could only manage a whisper. The doctor leaned closer. "Jesus," I managed to say. "I saw Jesus." Then darkness claimed me again, but ordinary unconsciousness this time, not death. And even in that darkness, I wasn't afraid. I knew now that I was never truly alone. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from my injuries. The shiv had punctured my stomach and nicked my liver, causing massive internal bleeding. By all medical assessments, I should have died. The trauma surgeon later told me that my heart had stopped for about 20 minutes, well beyond the point where brain damage typically becomes permanent. My recovery was more than physical. As I regained strength, I began sharing my experience with anyone who would listen. First the hospital chaplain, then fellow inmates after returning to prison. Many scoffed, calling me crazy or desperate, exactly as Jesus had warned. But others saw the profound change in me and listened. The prison psychologist diagnosed me with post-traumatic hallucinations, but couldn't explain why the formerly cynical atheist now spent hours studying scripture with an intensity that surprised even the prison chaplain. My mother wept with joy during her first visit after my recovery, saying simply, "I've prayed for this moment your entire life." 2 years later, I was granted early parole, partly due to my exemplary behavior and the rehabilitation program I'd helped establish in the prison. I sought out those I'd wronged, the store clerk I'd robbed, friends whose faith I'd mocked, family I'd pushed away. Some doors remained closed, some wounds too deep to heal completely. But where reconciliation was possible, I pursued it with humble persistence. I completed a theology degree through a correspondence program and began speaking at churches, colleges, and yes, prisons, sharing my testimony with anyone willing to hear how an atheist found undeniable truth through death. Today, 15 years after my death, I still bear physical and emotional scars from my journey. The nightmares about hell occasionally return, vivid reminders of what awaits those who reject truth until the end. But more powerful is the memory of that light, that perfect love that knew me completely, yet offered grace anyway. I don't claim to understand everything about God or faith, Some days, doubt still whispers at the edges of my consciousness. But I know what I experienced. I know who I met. And I know with certainty that none of us are merely physical beings having a temporary existence. We are eternal souls making choices with eternal consequences. My prayer is that you won't need to die to discover this truth for yourself.